Throughout Disney's history, some of their films have been based on the fairy tales written by the famous Danish artist Hans Christian Andersen. But if you have read his tales, you might know that Disney's adaptations are not always the most accurate ones, more precisely in their outcomes. And you might say, well, maybe his endings were not the most suitable for kids' movies, but weren't his fairy tales written for kids too? So my question here is, why Disney opts to change the original story's endings every single time? So there are 5 Andersen's tales that have been produced by Disney. 2 short films, The Ugly Duckling and The Little Match Girl, which I have no problem with since they did a pretty good job adapting the original stories, and 3 big movies, The Little Mermaid, The Steadfast Tin Soldier renamed The Piano Concert No. 2 in Fantasia 2000, and The Snow Queen, which inspired Frozen, in which every time they decided to modify the original stories, bringing a continuous fight between the good against the bad. For example, in the Little Mermaid movie, Disney develops the story practically in the same way as the original fairy tale. A mermaid that falls deeply in love with the prince, which she saves from an accident, decides to sacrifice her family and her boys to have the chance to be a human and marry the prince. But in the movie, she needs to kiss the prince within 72 hours, otherwise she would go back to being a mermaid and Ursula, the sea witch, will own her. In the original story, the witch doesn't give her a deadline, although if the prince decides to marry someone else, her heart will break and she will become foam on the water. In the movie, when Ursula realizes that the prince is falling in love with the mermaid, she hypnotizes him, spoiling the chance of the mermaid to kiss him before the 72 hours expire, but then Ariel stops her, defeats her and marries the prince. On the other hand, in Andersen's tales, the prince simply decides to marry someone else, because he believes that this other woman is the one that saved him, and even if he has feelings for the mermaid, he will only marry the woman that saved him. And for obvious reasons, the mermaid can explain him that she was the one that saved him. Therefore, her heart breaks and she becomes sea foam. There are not evil forces trying to stop the Little Mermaid from becoming human. It was just life, the cruel reality of life. Sometimes things don't end up in the way you were expecting, and you have to accept it and live with that, or in this case, die with it. Same thing happens in the Piano Concert No. 2 in Fantasia. The greater part of the movie sticks to the original story. There's a tin soldier in love with a paper ballerina, he's taken away from her, and after a series of lucky events, he ends up back at the same house with her. But in the movie, he fights against a Jack-in-the-Box toy that loves the ballerina too, and he ends up winning by throwing him into the flames. However, in Andersen's tale, once the tin soldier got back to the house, the human kid that owns him decides to throw him to the fire, just because. Yes, the soldier tries to blame the Jack-in-the-Box toy because of this, but the reality is that again, bad things happen in life, and sometimes there's no one you can blame on. It's just the way life works occasionally. I bet you're starting to get my point, but now let's see Frozen, which is the movie with the least similarities. I mean, even almost all of the characters are different from the original story. But there's this slight resemblance in the central plot that involves 2 people who love each other like family that are separated, not because of someone, but because different circumstances provoked it. And Disney was doing a pretty good job showing how sometimes there's no need of an evil force to take you away from the ones you love. Until this.
Oh, Anna. If only there was someone out there who loved you.
They had to do it. They had to involve a villain trying to stop the main characters from being happy. My whole point is that Disney has continued to modify Andersen's stories to tell a story where if something bad happens to the main characters, it must be someone else's fault. The endless battle of the good against the bad, but perhaps this was not what Christian Andersen was trying to convey through his tales. Perhaps he was trying to show to the kids how sometimes life is unfair with us for inexplicable reasons. He understood this from an early age, living in poverty during his childhood, losing his dad when he was 11 years old, and having to work to help his mother who had alcohol problems. And don't get me wrong, I understand that adaptations don't have to obey the original story in every way. But it would be nice to see once in a while a Disney movie that shows what made famous Andersen's popular fairy tales.